Hi, I'm Jackie Partridge. I'm an artist living and working in Wellesley, Ontario, and today we're going to be painting this campfire painting. I'm going to walk you through the steps of how to do it. So first we're going to get started with our art materials. I have a canvas that's 9 by 12 inches. I have my rag for cleaning my brushes, a container of water, and I have my palette with different colors. So we have the 3 primary colors. I have rubine red, primary yellow, cobalt blue, and then I have titanium white and a little bit of Mars black. So the brand of paint that I'm using is called Tech, which is a great brand for student painting, beginner painting. The quality is still really good, but it's at a cheaper price point. So sometimes different brands of paint will name colors slightly different. So try to just accommodate with the paints that you have and choose your colors accordingly. So you'll need a blue, a red, a yellow, kind of close to primary colors as best as possible, and then a black and a white. For our brushes, I have a flat 2-inch brush that's going to cover a lot of the background surface like the sky. I also have a flat 1-inch brush that has a flat edge to it, which is going to cover the ground of the grass as well as some of the trees. I have a round brush. It comes to a point. This brush is a size 6, so it's kind of a medium round brush. And this brush will cover like the trees as well as the logs and some of the detail of the fire. And then I have a really small round brush that's more for details, which is going to be for painting the sparks as well as some of the details of the flames. Alright, so first we're going to start with painting our sky. So we're going to start with a dark blue, then a medium blue, and then a light blue. So to make our dark blue, we're going to use some of our cobalt blue and some of our black mixed together. So you can just pull off a little bit of that, and I'm using my 1-inch flat brush. And just mixing it together to make our dark blue. So you can use your 2-inch brush to paint or your 1-inch brush. And as you're painting, you're just going to carry the color along the edges of the canvas as well, because you're going to be able to see that color and see the edge when the canvas is hanging on the wall. So just make sure that you paint the edge of your canvas, and you're going to paint the dark blue so that it's about 1/3 of the way down the canvas. So make sure you paint the top edge as well. So when you're painting a canvas, it's good to usually do about 2 coats of paint. Because you can notice that there's a lot of texture on the surface and a lot of those little white dots of the canvas showing through. So it's always good to do about 2 coats of paint and make sure you have quite a lot of paint on your brush. So as I'm painting, I'm kind of painting in a nice curve or semicircle, and that's because our focal point is the campfire. So by painting in this kind of direction of a semicircle, I'm just kind of framing the campfire, which is our focal point. It's where our eye is drawn to, and it's the brightest colors and brightest spot on the canvas, so that's why it's a focal point. So I've painted my dark blue section and I've painted the edges of my canvas. So you'll probably want to do about 2 coats of paint, but I'm just going to show you with one. So now that I have the dark blue painted, I'm going to go ahead and layer in the blue, this is just cobalt blue straight from the tube. I'm continuing with the semicircle pattern, and I haven't washed my brush. I'm just going to kind of layer the paint over top of the blue. So I'm just mixing it and blending it together, and I'm kind of layering this dark blue over top of the blue on my canvas. I'm remembering to paint the edges of my canvas. And again, you can add about 2 coats of paint to really cover up some of the brush strokes and some of the texture of the canvas, and make sure you have all of those white dots on the canvas covered up. So you can also add a little bit of your dark blue that you've mixed and just apply it over top, just kind of layer it in so that it's all nice and blended. We don't want it to look like stripes, we want to blend it together. So with acrylic paint, you're just layering the colors over top of each other. You can also blend with adding a little bit of water on your brush, but that will also dilute the color and make it more thin and more transparent. So you don't want to add too much water. But what I'm doing is I'm just using dry brushing. So I haven't added water to my brush. I'm just layering the colors over top of each other. So as the paint dries, you're going to get rid of some of the brush strokes as well, and doing a second coat of paint will help you get rid of those brush strokes as well, but I kind of like them, so I'm just going to leave them on mine. Make sure you paint the edges. So our next section of blue is going to be white mixed with cobalt blue. So I'm going to clean my brush, dip it in water, swirl it around, and just wipe it off on my rag so that it's nice and clean, because I don't want to get the white paint super dirty. And then I'm just going to pull some white paint over here to mix. And you can clean your brush off again, or you can just pull it from the side of the blue paint. And we're just going to mix it together. So that we have our lighter blue. And again, I'm just going to paint this section, and I'm going to layer it so that it's a couple inches overlapping our previous blue section, and that's just going to help blend our sections together. And I'm going to do the same on the edges of the canvas as well. And I'm going to paint right down to the bottom. I don't need to worry about the bottom edge of the canvas because we're going to add the ground over top of our sky so that we're really building up layers on our canvas. And just continue to kind of layer the colors. Again, I'm using this kind of semicircle, kind of swaying my brush back and forth, just so that it can kind of frame the sky and frame our campfire. And you want it all blended together so that it doesn't look too stripy. So you're just kind of overlapping the colors. All right. So now we're going to add our black kind of ground or grass on the bottom of our canvas. So I'm just going to use my 1-inch flat brush to do that. I'm going to clean off my brush, dip it in water, rub it on my rag, make sure most of the blue paint is off, and I'm just going to use solid black, so the Mars black, and I'm just going to paint a couple inches along the canvas, just along the bottom of the canvas. And you can just paint the bottom edge as well, just solid black. So the nice thing with acrylics is that when it dries, you can just paint over something. So you don't need to worry about it looking too perfect. I'm just going to kind of paint these like hills or the ground. So the ground isn't super flat. It's not going to be a straight horizontal line. So you can add some curves to your ground just to make it look a little bit more interesting and a little bit more realistic. And I'm just going to create this kind of dip here so that I can put my fire on top. So you can wait for your sky to dry before painting this, or if you're painting it while it's still wet like I am, just make sure that you have enough paint on your brush to cover it up. Okay, so now that we have our ground done, we're going to start with our trees. In this painting I have 4 trees, but you can choose however many trees you want. If you want 3 or 2, you can choose to do that. So when you're painting trees, keep them different sizes, keep them different thicknesses. Every tree is slightly different, so you don't want to paint super perfect trees or paint them so that they're all looking the same size. So to paint our trees, I'm using my round brush, the number 6. So it's kind of this medium-sized round brush. And I'm just going to dip it into the black. And as you're painting the trees, you can just kind of use the paint to just kind of map out the height that you want the trees to be, remembering that the fire is going to be around the middle of the canvas. So I can just start by painting a line, and this is just going to let me kind of see how tall I'm going to make the trees. So it's totally up to you, but you want to make some that are maybe a bit smaller and some that are maybe a bit taller. And you can kind of have them off to the side so that some of the branches are going off the page. So I think I'm just going to do 3 trees, and this one will be shorter. So now that you kind of have the heights mapped out of the trees, you're just going to use your brush and kind of squiggle the branches. So start out towards the edge and just kind of squiggle towards the tip. So it doesn't need to be super perfect, and you can kind of create these spaces in between the branch. Towards the bottom of the tree, the branches are going to be a lot thicker, and so sometimes they might have gaps where the sky is showing through, and sometimes they might just be completely covered. And again, as I'm approaching the edge of the canvas, I'm just carrying the paint over. So towards the base of our tree, it's going to be really covered, because in a forest you have a lot of bushes or other smaller trees growing, so you're not going to have a lot of gaps in your tree towards the base of it. So you can keep the base nice and thick with lots of black paint. And I'm going to keep nice pointy tips at the end of my brush for the branches. And your trees are going to overlap as well, so they don't need to be not touching each other, because in a forest the branches are going to overlap, so it's okay if they overlap and mesh into each other. I find that painting quickly with tree branches, that way I'm not worried about it looking perfect. You can also kind of make these little quick tick marks to create some texture on the branches. And again, I'm keeping the bottom nice and thick. I'm doing the same for my last tree. Again, you can choose however many trees you want to have. If you want to have even more, or if you're working on a larger canvas than I am, then maybe you want to have more trees. And again, make sure you paint around the edge as well. So I have quite a lot of paint on my brush, so that I don't need to really go back and paint a second coat. And when you're just starting out, usually people don't have enough paint on their brush. So make sure you can't see too much of the canvas or those little white dots shining through. Again, I'm overlapping the branches because these two trees are next to each other. And I'm keeping the base nice and thick. So now I'm just going to fill in some of the dots where I can see too much of the sky. Okay, so now that I have the black, which is kind of the shadows painted, I can go ahead and add some white, mixing that to make a gray, which is going to be the highlights of our branches. So the branches that are facing the fire and are closest to the fire are going to have some white mixed in with the black. So I'm going to create this kind of mid-tone gray, so a little bit of white, mostly black. And that's just going to go over top, and you can just apply it over top, similar to how we painted the sky, layering the colors. And so it only needs to be the branches that are closest to the fire. So we're going to keep it to the tops of the branches because the bottoms of the branches are going to be darker since the shadow of the branch above it is going to be casted onto that. And adding these highlights, it's just going to help it make it look more realistic, but also give it some texture. So you could easily spend all day painting your trees and making them look perfect, but for this example, I'm just going to stop because I'm kind of happy with how it looks. So maybe just a few more areas of white. So you can also add some just solid white on your brush, and I haven't washed my brush at all, just to add a little bit more highlight in some areas. And then you can add some highlights on the ground as well, just keeping that white or that gray on your brush just to kind of pull out the texture of the ground. Okay, so now our trees are done. They're nicely blended. They don't look like they have too much blobs of white on them. So now we're going to go ahead and paint our fire. So to start our fire, we're going to paint the logs around the base of our fire. So I'm just going to clean off my round brush, number 6 brush, rub it on my rag, get as much gray off as possible. And I'm going to start by mixing my brown. So to make brown, you're going to mix your 3 primary colors. Your yellow, a little bit of yellow, and a little bit of red, and a little bit of blue. So you're going to add about the same amount of each color and then mix it together to see what you get. So that's a good brown. I think I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to it so it's a bit lighter. So I can just pull some off from the edge. And when I'm painting my logs, I'm just going to make sure that they're kind of angled diagonally like this, so that they're looking realistic. But before I paint the fire and before I paint the logs, I'm just going to wait for my canvas to dry. So it's going to take about 20 or 30 minutes. So you can come back to it, pause this video, just wait for it to dry so that you can layer your logs and your campfire on top. So we're back to our painting. I've let it dry. It's still not fully dry. I can tell because it's still a bit shiny. So the paint is going to dry more matte, and that's going to tell us that it is dry. So I just touched up my painting a little bit while I was waiting for it to dry, and I used my detail brush. I added some black, and I just added some little dashes, some little bits of black, and some little lines just to add some texture towards the end of some of the branches. So that's something that you can add as well. I also just touched up and added some extra black to kind of cover up some areas and add another layer to my trees. in some spots. So make sure you're happy with your sky, you're happy with your tree. I covered up some of the brush strokes in the sky as well. So make sure you're happy with the trees, you're happy with the ground and the sky before you begin with the fire. So again, we're using our brown, and you're mixing equal parts of yellow, red, and blue, which is our primary colors. And I'm using my round brush number 6, making sure that it's nice and clean, and I'm going to angle the logs so that they're kind of creating like a teepee style fire. And as I'm adding my logs, I'm just painting over top of what I've already painted, the ground and the trees, and it should cover because I have quite a bit of paint on my brush and I've waited for the ground and the trees to mostly dry. So when I'm adding my logs, I want to create a variety of different shades of brown. So I might pull a section of brown and add a little bit more yellow to create more of a yellowy brown. I might add a bit more red to create a more reddish brown. And having this variety is just going to help make the fire look more realistic and more natural. I could add a bit of black to make some of the brown a bit darker. I can add a bit of blue, just so that I have some variety of different colors. And you can make little coals and things like that, some round shapes like different coals. I'm going to use some of the gray that I mixed before for the trees to add some different coals. And you can use your smaller brush as well to kind of create some shadows and highlights similar to how we did the trees. So towards the bottom of the logs, they're going to be darker near the ground, and towards the top of the logs or closer to the frame, they're going to have a highlight. So you can just add a little bit of extra white to it where they're kind of facing the fire. And you can build up a couple of layers of paint so that everything is nice and covered. So once you're happy with your logs, then we can get started with the flames. So to paint the flames, I'm using my small detail brush. It's quite small, the bristles come to a point, so it's a nice round brush, and it's going to be good for doing our details. So with our fire, we're going to start with red on the outside, then we're going to mix red and yellow to create orange, then we're going to have yellow, and then we're going to mix yellow and white for the center of our fire. The center of the fire is the lightest part because that is the hottest part of our fire. So first we're just going to start with some red. And as I'm painting the fire, I'm just going to keep the lines nice and short and kind of curved and wavy, so they don't need to be perfect. They don't need to all be the same size or the same thickness. And I'm just going to build up a bunch of repeated lines so that it looks like the fire is more lifelike and is kind of moving around. So now I'm going to mix my red and yellow together to get orange. I think I'm going to add a little bit of extra yellow. You can add as much yellow as you want until you're kind of happy with the color. And then similar to how we painted our sky, you can also layer the orange right on top of the red or right beside it as well. So again, the lines are all kinds of different lengths to them and different bits of thickness. And I'm just kind of curving them in. So now that I have my orange, I can add a little bit of red back over top in some sections to kind of create a reddish orange. And now I'm going to add my yellow. So I can apply some yellow directly onto the orange and over top of the red and kind of mix it directly on the canvas instead of mixing it on my palette. And I can have some spots that are just yellow as well. And you might need to add a couple layers of yellow so that it's covering up some of the sky and some of the darker colors that we used. And now I'm just going to keep some of the yellow and I'm going to clean my brush so that I don't dirty my white too much. And I'm going to pull some white and mix our light yellow. And I'm just going to build up that layer. And you can add some over top by the red and orange as well. And just some really short, kind of tiny lines to cover up the detail. And then I'm going to clean off my brush and add some solid white just to the center of our fire. Dab it off a little bit. So this is the nice hot part of the fire. So quite a lot of white in there. Perfect. So now we're going to add some of the sparks. So to do the sparks, you're just going to keep your brush kind of dirty and you're going to put a couple of different colors on your brush. So I have some orange and some yellow on my brush, and then I'm just going to kind of create these little globs and just keep them different sizes. You don't want to keep them evenly spaced. You kind of want to space them out sporadically, so some can be really close together, some can be super tiny, and then some can be a bit bigger. And some can be further apart, kind of all different sizes. So I'm just keeping my brush kind of dirty and adding different colors of reds and oranges together. And just keep going until you're kind of happy with it and they've kind of floated up the page into the sky. And so once your fire has dried a bit more, you can add another layer to some of the lighter colors like the yellow and just make it more rich if you want to. Because acrylic painting is really just about building up the layers and building up the colors and the detail. So I think I'm going to do that with the logs as well, because some of the logs are a bit harder to see. So I'm just going to give them another coat of paint so that they stand out a little bit more. Really quickly. And I'm just going to keep the bottom of the logs a bit darker to form a kind of shadow, and the tops of the logs or the coals a bit lighter. Can mix some white in there just to highlight where the flames are touching it. Perfect. Just add some little kind of wispy lines to the side to make your fire look more full. So now that we have our sparks and we have our fire done, now we're going to paint our stars. So you're going to need to clean off your brush. I'm just using my small detail brush. Make sure it's super clean, wipe it on the rag. And you're going to get it a little bit wet, not too wet, so you can just kind of tap it off on your cup. And you're just going to dip it into the white, and so you can see that it's kind of wet, but there's still white paint. I'm going to make sure my fingers are as clean as possible because they're quite dirty. And then I'm just going to pull the bristles back, and that's going to create this kind of splatter. And I'm just going to do that at the top of my canvas. And if I get a splatter that I don't like, I can just wipe it away with my finger or my rag, or I can paint over it. So don't worry if it doesn't turn out perfect. So the closer that you go towards the canvas, the bigger the dots are going to be. So if you hold your brush further away, then the dots or the stars are going to be smaller. And each time you're just going to make sure that your brush is a bit wet so that the white can really spread and splatter easily. Awesome. And now I can go and put my detail brush in my black paint, and I can just cover up some of the dots that were splattered on the tree. I can just paint over those. Don't need to worry too much about it being perfect. I think the stars just add kind of a final touch to the painting. And I'm just adding some of the brown mixed with the black on the trees when I'm covering up some of the dots, just to add another texture and a little bit of variety. And so it's always good to kind of step back and look at your painting from further away, just so that you can be really happy with it and so that everything kind of stands out, because when you're painting up close, you notice things that are a little bit different from further away. So you can kind of hold it further away just to make sure that you're happy with how it turned out. Thanks for watching this video on how to paint a campfire. As you can see, the painting that I just did, I used a cobalt blue, so it's a slightly different blue than this one. This one used an ultramarine blue. So depending on the type of blue or yellow or red that you use, your painting might look different, and that's okay. Your painting doesn't have to look like mine. Everyone has their own unique style and their own way of painting, which is completely awesome. You can decide how big or how tall or how many trees you have, and that is perfectly fine. So I would love to see the painting that you have created. If you'd like to share it on Instagram, you can tag me at JackiePartridge_, or you can use the hashtag Jackie Partridge art classes, because I would love to see what you have created. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed the video.